Welcome to my summer patio, and one plant that takes centre stage, grown in patio pots, are the wonderful lilies. These are a range of rose lily double flowered lilies, and aren't they absolutely glorious? I've got a mixture of different name varieties here, and these doubled flowered ones are so impressive, with layer after layer of beautiful petals that open to reveal the fragrant blooms. Lilies are a really easy bulb to plant in patio pots. Now you'll find lily bulbs available in garden centres or from mail order suppliers early in the year. You might even be able to place your orders during the winter months, but you'll get the lily bulbs delivered probably in those early months of the year, late winter, early spring, February, March or April, and they can be planted up straight away. Some people might plant their lily bulbs in their borders. Some people, like me, will plant them in patio pots, and I love them in pots because you can then move the pots around the patio to give you different displays during the summer months. Now lilies will usually come into flower around about the middle of summer, from June into July, July into August, and give you a lovely succession of flowers. And if you want flowers for a longer period of time, just grow a range of different varieties. You could put mixtures in pots like this, or you could just grow one variety in a pot to give you a really impressive display. I love growing my lilies in large terracotta pots. I find terracotta is a weighty, stable material, so if you're growing tall varieties of lilies like these rose lily from double flower varieties, then the plant has got more stability. I line the inside of terracotta pots with some old pieces of compost bags, some old bits of plastic that you might have lying around, or an old compost bag. Cut it into little pieces, place those and line the inside of the pot before you fill it with compost. Don't cover over the drainage holes in the base of the pot, but if you line the inside of the pot with plastic, it stops the compost losing so much moisture during those hot summer days, so the compost retains the moisture for longer. Then I fill with compost, just a good multi-purpose compost will do. Plant several lilies in each pot. Depending how big the pot is, you might find that there's room for 5 or 6 or 7 lily bulbs. Plant generously to create a really impressive display. Plant bulbs with a root plate downwards and the shoots pointing upwards, and plant them deeply so the bulbs are covered to about 3 times their own depth in compost. This supports the tall flower stems as they develop, and some varieties even produce roots from these stems, so they've got extra rooting support too. Then you can leave the pots out on your patio. If you want to speed up growth, you could plant them up in, let's say, March or April time in your conservatory or greenhouse, and get the bulbs growing more quickly. Keep the pots well watered. In the summer, when the lily bulbs are growing up strongly, I usually stand my terracotta pots in a saucer of water, which I can top up each day, so the pot has got a reservoir of moisture to take up on those hot days of summer. Just keep them well watered. Tall varieties I find are quite stable and they don't need staking, but if you have got some rather top heavy plants, then put some stakes or some canes in and tie up the plant for support. But this rose lily variety is very stable. I haven't had to stake it at all, and it's created a really nice display. The taller the display, you can move these pots to the back of your patio pot display. If they're shorter varieties, you can have them at the front and just enjoy week after week of glorious flowers. And lilies are really easy to care for. Once the flowers have finished and the petals have fallen, I just literally snip off the faded flower heads. Leave the stalks and the leaves there to die down naturally over the following weeks and months. Then you can either leave your lily bulbs in the pots for the winter, or some people might clean off the old compost and store the lily bulbs themselves. But I quite often just leave the bulbs in the pots, let the stems die down naturally, and in the autumn I'll cut away that withered stem right down at soil level, leave the bulbs in the pots, put them in a sheltered part of the garden, perhaps place the pot on its side so it doesn't get too waterlogged during the winter months, and then in the spring Sometimes you could just leave the bulbs in the same pot for another year, water them and the bulbs start growing. Otherwise you could knock them out of the old compost, clean off the bulbs and replant them in some fresh compost. Now I probably add some slow release fertiliser to the compost at planting time just to keep the bulbs going through the summer. Otherwise all you have to do as a gardener is to keep the pots well watered and maybe mix in some liquid feed at the same time, some high potash food to help to boost the flowering. Then the only real problem that you will find, and I haven't found a gardener who doesn't find lily beetles walking up the flowers and the leaves of the lilies earlier in the summer. Then they'll be laying their eggs and the larvae will be eating away at the lily leaves. So do be on the lookout for lily beetle. You can get a deterrent spray to spray the leaves of the lilies, and that's meant to make them slightly unpalatable so that the lilies won't stay on the plants and feed on the leaves. Otherwise, part of my summer daily ritual is to walk down the garden, have a look at the lily flowers, check over the plants and see whether I find any adult lily beetles, those little red crimson beetles walking up or hiding on the underside of leaves, or literally if they've been there for a while, just check they haven't laid any eggs. There's little larvae nibbling away at the leaves, and physically taking them off, washing them off, removing them from the plant and get rid of them that way is so often the best thing to do, rather than resorting to any harmful chemical sprays that might harm other creatures around your garden. And how about this for a really stunning patio display? This is a dwarf oriental hybrid called Sunny Martinique. It's got these gorgeous deep pink flowers, really large, about probably 7 or 8 inches across. Flowers produced from July into August, and in this patio pot I put about half a dozen bulbs planted up in April time, and it's given me this gorgeous sunny summer display. Flowers are also richly fragrant too, so you've got a beautiful fragrance. They're single flowers, so they open up wide and you've got these lovely golden stamen here covered in pollen, and if you're lucky you'll find hoverflies coming into your garden and feeding on the pollen. Hoverflies are a beneficial insect. The adult flies feed on pollen and nectar on the blooms, then they'll be breeding and laying eggs, and the larvae of the hoverfly will be eating your pests, your aphids like greenfly and blackfly. Now once the flowering is over, all I will do is cut off the faded flowers, leave the leaf stalk and the leaves in place and let those die down naturally over the next couple of months. And then I'll probably leave these bulbs in a pot over the winter and just literally water again in the spring and start them back into growth, probably in my greenhouse to get them into growth earlier in the year. If you want, you could tip the bulbs out of the compost and replant them into fresh compost themselves. But this will give me displays of flowers for several more years to come. Now, sometimes you'll find new little lily bulbs forming around the sides of the large central adult bulb, and those new little lily bulbs take several years to reach flowering size. So if you do find that your pots over the course of years get congested with lots of growth but very few flowers, tip them out, divide them up, take the biggest bulbs and grow those on, and those little lily bulbs can be planted up and grown on over the course of perhaps 3 or 4 years to reach full flowering size. Just keep the larger bulbs in the pots to make sure you get a beautiful display of varieties like this lovely Sunny Martinique. And in addition to lily bulbs forming little offsets around them that you can break off and pot on, some lily varieties produce little bulbils in the axils of the leaf, where the leaf joins onto the main stem, and you can pick these off. Sometimes they have little roots on them already, pot them up individually either in pots or little modules and grow them on. And if you grow them on over several years, they'll get bigger each year and they'll gradually reach flowering size after about 3 or 4 years. This is a new lily I've planted this year called Lilium leichtlinii. I planted the bulbs early in spring, and they've grown up taller than me now, the height of summer during July. It produces tall stems covered with multiple flowers, each of these golden flowers with beautiful blackish brown speckled markings on its petals. It's absolutely glorious, and the flowers just hang daintily, producing a display like this which will last for several weeks to brighten up my patio. Another favourite dwarf variety of lily I grow in a pot is this one called Garden Party, a lovely dwarf variety with a golden band across the centre of the flower, brushed with an apricot pink colour down the centre of each petal. Beautiful little speckled, freckled markings on it as well. This is a perfect variety to go in a patio pot. Probably reaches about 2 foot in height, so certainly one if you're growing it in a pot to put towards the front of your patio displays. It will continue flowering in my garden here in the East Midlands through July and into early August, giving you probably 4 to 6 weeks of colour before I'll deadhead and move the pots away and let the bulbs die down naturally over the course of the coming months. One word of warning when it comes to growing lilies: you do have to be careful about the pollen. The pollen, which is produced generously on the blooms, like I said, the hoverflies do adore it, but it is poisonous to cats. So if you've got cats, be very, very careful about growing lilies, because if they get the pollen on their fur and they lick it off, it can be extremely poisonous. Now, if you do love lilies, then you can actually go over the flowers and trim off, cut off the pollen sacs, get rid of the pollen completely, and that means that the flowers will be safe. You can also do the same thing if you want to actually cut some of these lily blooms and bring them indoors to enjoy them for an indoor display. The alternative is that you can grow pollen-free varieties of lilies. Things like the double-flowered rose lily variety are very good, although even some of those can produce pollen, but the double-flowered varieties, the flowers don't open fully, and therefore there's no pollen exposed, and they should be safe to grow if you've got cats around your garden. Otherwise, if you want to grow lilies safely, again, just pop over the flowers as soon as they open, just trim off the pollen sacs, and the flowers will then not produce pollen which will get on the cat's fur. Just bear in mind that all parts of the lily are poisonous, so if your cats do start nibbling plants, those could be poisonous, and perhaps avoid growing lilies altogether. And something else to look out for when you're choosing the lilies to grow in your garden is look for those varieties which have received a very special award from the flower experts at the Royal Horticultural Society, and Garden Party has been awarded the Award of Garden Merit, a real accolade for a lily. It just shows it's a garden worthy variety. It will grow well in the patio, and lots of varieties of lilies have received an Award of Garden Merit, so check in the plant catalogues and see if your favourite varieties have got it. It's certainly worth searching out these award-winning plants when choosing things to grow in your garden, whether that's flowers, fruits, vegetables, trees, shrubs, whatever it is. The Royal Horticultural Society has awarded lots of garden plants this very special award, and it means they're going to be the best performing plants to grow in your garden. That's why I've chosen Garden Party as one of my favourite dwarf lilies for my patio pots.